What if the devil himself stood trial and won? In the shadow of justice, where truth and madness collide, there are cases so dark they feel cursed, cases where the accused swear under oath that their actions were not their own. Cases where courtrooms become battlegrounds not just for evidence and testimony but for the very soul of humanity. These are the trials where the devil himself is called to the stand. Where guilt, innocence, and damnation blur into one chilling question: if evil can control a man, who truly deserves to sentence him? Or the one pulling the strings, the courthouse in Salem, Massachusetts, stood like a relic of another age, a place where history and horror often met. On a stormy October evening in 1974, the courtroom was nearly silent except for the rattling chains of Daniel Morris, a 32-year-old mechanic accused of brutally murdering his wife. From the first day of the trial, Daniel insisted he wasn't guilty. His defense: "The devil made me do it." The case drew reporters, priests, and skeptics, each wanting to witness what many called the possession trial. The evidence was damning: blood-stained tools, witnesses hearing screams, a neighbor seeing him leave the house, but Daniel's hollow eyes and trembling hands suggested something far darker. Dr. Karen Whitlock, a psychologist called by the defense, testified, "Daniel believes he is being controlled by an external force." The bruises on his arms, they appeared overnight, with no signs of self-infliction, but the prosecution dismissed it all as theatrics until the second night of testimony, when the lights in the courtroom flickered and a faint whisper echoed across the chamber. Several jurors swore they heard a voice say, "He's mine." Panic rippled through the room, but the judge ordered the trial to continue. As Daniel stared at the jury, tears streaming down his face, he whispered, "It wasn't me. I tried to stop him, but he's still here." Suddenly, the lights went out completely. In the darkness, a scream high-pitched, inhuman shook the walls. When the emergency lights returned, Daniel was slumped over, unconscious, his hands covered in deep scratches, as though something had clawed him from within. The judge called for recess, his face pale, voice trembling. "Court is adjourned until tomorrow." But as the gavel struck, every light in the building shattered at once, one case down, two go. And with each trial, the devil steps closer to his verdict. The courtroom was different that day. The air was thick, suffocating, almost alive. The chandelier swayed as if some unseen storm raged through the room, and the temperature plummeted until the jurors could see their own breath. The defendant, a gaunt man with trembling hands, rose to speak, but it wasn't his voice that came out. It was deeper, older, a growl that vibrated through the floorboards, making the gavel rattle in the judge's grip. "He made me do it," the voice thundered, not from his lips, but from somewhere behind him, above him, everywhere. The crucifix on the wall twisted, metal groaning, until it hung upside down. The evidence: the prosecution presented photographs, crime scenes so drenched in blood they seemed almost painted in horror. But what made the jury recoil wasn't the gore, it was the shapes. Symbols carved into the victim's skin, patterns older than language. Patterns whispered about in forbidden texts. One of the jurors fainted when the lights flickered and, for a split second, the symbols seemed to move, writhing like worms under the flash of the camera. The possession: the defense claimed possession. The man had been a loving father, a loyal husband, until one night he woke to whispers. Whispers that crawled through his ears, into his skull, telling him to spill blood in exchange for freedom. But the whispers weren't done. As he testified, a scream tore through the courtroom, not from his throat, but from the walls themselves. Deep, guttural, and inhuman, the verdict: the judge called for order. But the lights burst, glass raining down like shards of frozen tears, and then, silence. The man stood frozen, eyes rolling white, lips parting to utter one final sentence in a voice not his own: "The next case is already waiting." What happens when the devil himself is called to the stand? The trial room was darker than usual that morning. Heavy clouds pressed against the old courthouse windows, and the smell of rain mixed with something sharper: sulfur. This time, the case was unlike the others. A young man named Ethan Black stood accused of savagely murdering his entire family. The crime scene was a slaughterhouse of human remains, claw marks, and symbols carved into the walls, symbols no one recognized. But Ethan's defense was not of this world. His lawyer, pale and trembling, whispered to the jury, "The devil made him do it, and we can prove it." As the prosecution presented grisly photographs, blooded furniture, a child's toy melted into the floor, lights flickered overhead. The judge slammed his gavel, Control the theatrics, he barked, though his voice cracked, betraying fear. Then came the defense's final move. They called their star witness a presence no one dared name. The air grew heavy, the temperature dropped. Black smoke curled up from the floorboards, and then he appeared. A tall figure, skin like scorched leather, horns faintly glowing, eyes like pits of molten gold. The devil sat at the witness stand, he smiled. "Ask your questions," he hissed, his voice vibrating through bone and marrow. The testimony was chaos. He spoke of bargains signed in blood, whispered promises in the dark, the ownership of souls. Every word dripped with ancient malice. Jurors wept, one collapsed. The stenographer's hands bled as she typed. And when the final question came, "Did you make Ethan do this?" The devil leaned forward, his grin stretching unnaturally wide. "I didn't make him do anything. I just showed him who he really was." The lights exploded. The smell of burning flesh filled the room. When vision returned, Ethan was gone. Only a blackened outline of his body remained on the courtroom floor smoking, as if burned from existence. The judge adjourned the trial without a word. No verdict, no sentence, no closure, only fear. The courthouse stood like a relic of judgment, its wooden beams creaking as though the building itself feared what was coming. The air carried the scent of rot and damp stone, and an unshakable silence wrapped around the empty hallways like a shroud. But tonight, the courtroom would not be empty. This was the final case, the one that would decide not just guilt or innocence, but the boundary between the living and the damned. The files from the 3 previous trials lay scattered across the judge's bench. Each told of human horror wrapped in supernatural whispers, but tonight, something more primal had been summoned. The courtroom clock struck midnight, the gathering of the damned. A faint vibration shook the floorboards. The chandeliers trembled overhead, their light casting frantic shadows across the jury box. From every corner of the room, a presence seeped in, dark, cold, and watching. First came the spirits of the wrongfully accused, victims of trials twisted by forces beyond human comprehension. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly as they drifted through the aisles. Behind them, whispers of laughter and human laughter echoed like an approaching storm. The devil had returned, but this time, he wasn't alone. The trial of humanity, the judge's gavel slammed against the bench once, twice, but no sound came. His lips moved, but no words followed. Instead, a voice rose from everywhere at once, a voice that was not human. "This court will now judge the living." The jury, once 12 men and women, were gone. In their place sat shadows with teeth, their grins sharp as razors. The bailiff hung upside down from the ceiling like a marionette, his empty eyes dripping tar. The prosecutor tried to speak, but blood streamed from his mouth instead of words. The defense attorney knelt in prayer, but his prayer was answered by a low growl from beneath the floorboards. And then the final witness arrived. The woman in black, she entered silently, the ghost of the first case. Her face pale as bone, her eyes pools of sorrow and rage. She floated to the center of the courtroom, her dress trailing smoke. The devil turned to her. "Tell them," he whispered. "Tell them who brought us here." Her voice was hollow, distant yet cutting through the silence like broken glass. "They did, all of them, the greed, the lies. The justice that was never just. Humanity brought me back." The lights died. In the blackness, screams rose not from fear of the ghost or the devil, but from the realization that the courtroom was no longer a place of law. It had become a gate. The verdict, when the lights returned, there were no lawyers, no judge, no jury, only rows of empty seats, and the faint smell of sulfur. On the judge's bench, burned into the wood, were 3 words: "Case closed, forever." What do you say? When the final verdict isn't about guilt, but about your soul. If this story chilled you to the bone, hit that like button, subscribe for more terrifying tales from Trial of Shadows, and leave a comment. Would you survive a courtroom where the devil calls the verdict?